everyone, and welcome to another episode of HiX-Men Report. We are back, the Hickman 4, to talk about another fairly sexy issue of Powers of 10, issue 5 that we're going to be discussing. There is so much to unpack, so much bitch slapping going around, and sassiness abundant. Just before we start the show, Zach blew my mind with a concept that apparently existed in Marvel Universe that we're going to be talking about later in the show. Because I did a whole entire episode just to talk about it. So, gentlemen, how are you all doing today?
I am doing well. Always the highlight of my week to be here.
Oh, Tyler?
I'm good.
Okay.
There's some really nice things about this issue.
Ooh,
so
okay.
I'm happy to talk about it.
And Peter, it looks like you're in a different location.
I actually had time to do some unpacking this week, and I have, as we'll be discussing later, my favorite work of art here. Happens to be relevant to this issue, as luck would have it.
And we're all ready to talk about all of this. I'm glad that the move went well. Everything came together.
Everything's here, yeah.
Nothing got damaged along the way because you just moved
me.
10 minutes.
Yeah.
Oh, just you.
just his soul.
Just your corners are a little bumped up. You have certain dents and scratches, but normal wear and tear. Nothing.
Yes, normal wear and tear.
Yeah,
Nothing that we're going to lose our security deposit over.
Okay, awesome. All right. So with that, let's start with this episode. It's the issue begins. Well, they will think we're doing one thing, but the truth is we are doing something altogether different. Professor X. I feel like this was actually written for Peter because I think Jonathan Hickman is telling Peter that Peter, you think we're doing one thing, we're going to be doing something different. I don't know. As soon as I read that, I just thought of you. So.
It's one of those statements of Hickmanian misdirection that we've gotten several times now in this series. Hickman just hitting us over the head with the fact that we don't know what he's doing yet, and he knows we don't know what he's doing yet.
And he thinks that we know that he knows that we know.
Yeah, we're playing a little Princess Bride mind game with Jonathan Hickman, all of us readers over here.
So, Peter, do you want to get us started with year 1 of X-Men?
Sure. So this is a Powers of X issue, which means, or Powers of 10, I should say, so I don't have to put change in the jar. So that means we're progressing through time periods. And this X to the 0 power year 1 is still used pretty loosely because if we look at some of the details in this scene between Professor X and Forge in his Eagle Plaza home in Dallas, this is pretty far along into the X-Men timeline. It's nothing like year 1. But again, we're talking about orders of magnitude here. It's still closer to 10 than 1. But okay, Hickman, you can have your device.
Given the timeline in Life 10, I'm not even sure that orders of magnitude do place this in X to the 0 power anymore. But you know what? I'm not going to question this.
Yeah, let's not question. So Xavier goes to Forge in his home. This we established very early in meeting Forge that it has this ability to holographically create environments as we see in the original classic Life Death with Storm in Uncanny X-Men 186 by Barry Windsor Smith. And Xavier has a bold proposal for Forge. So let's begin with Faria. What did you think about Xavier's bold proposal for Forge?
So, this was, I think, like my least favorite, and I put that in an air quote. It's just a lot of data dumping that's going on, because we have already seen what Cerebro is capable of in House of X 5 last issue, because it seems like it's very important part that is playing in the X-Men role. So I'm like, oh, okay, so this is kind of giving us some backstory of how that came to be. So I kind of took it as a more of an information stuff, and I was like, well, maybe Zach, Peter, and Tyler will tell me otherwise. So Zach, Peter, and Tyler tell me otherwise.
Well, as always with these scenes, I am curious to see how and where we can situate it in X-Men continuity. And it seems in this case that the most likely candidate is going to be very close to where we set the Sinister recruitment scene that we saw from the last time around, which is to say probably right around the time of Mutant Genesis, maybe right before that Schism encounter with Magneto, maybe right after. But even though the color of the lighting makes it seem weird, Forge seems to be wearing his X-Men uniform, We know that Xavier had returned from the Shi'ar Empire at that point and would have had access to the Shi'ar tech that he's asking Forge to use here. And importantly, in X-Men number 5, we see explicitly that Forge has altered Cerebro using Shi'ar technology. So Hickman seems to be deliberately building this scene around that later revelation. And interestingly, one issue before that, we see that Moira abruptly walks out of X-Mansion and leaves the X-Men following her confrontation with Magneto, which seems to knit together these occurrences of Xavier and Magneto recruiting Sinister, Xavier getting Forge to reconstruct Cerebro to upload all of these mutant minds, and then the schism between Xavier, Moira, and Magneto, all in very quick succession at this very same point.
Tyler?
I mean, I place it slightly after, but it's in the vicinity of those issues that you're talking about. I felt like this might be post the breakup, between Forge and Storm, where he left and went back to Dallas. So it's right there. It's just a little bit later.
Yeah, I don't disagree with either of those takes. I think it's, time will tell where it falls, but it's clearly within that like 30-ish issue range, either from right after Uncanny X-Men 280 to probably right before Uncanny X-Men 300, because there are other factors affecting whether the scene could happen in there. But here's what's more interesting to me about Hickman lingering in this time period, right? Because we just saw the Sinister scene. He's doing very specific repair to certain parts of continuity to contextualize them differently and maybe restore the importance that they originally were meant to have. And with here, he's playing right on that edge of Claremont. And we know that Claremont had so many interesting plots that he didn't get to see through, about Wolverine dying, about all of these other things. And he never got to see them through. And so Hickman is trying to almost refertilize the soil of that end of Claremont run to make it seem as though it contained all of the story hooks that would catapult us years forward, and he's also doing repair to certain things in continuity that never quite made sense because of that abrupt transition. Like, why does Sinister get so fixated on the mutant things that he's fixated on, in early Peter David X Factor and then in Executioner's Song? Because of the scene we saw last week. Why maybe is Forge cursed with this knowledge that makes him into a bad guy over and over again after this point? Well, this scene might explain it too. So it's even though
why is Magneto's behavior so erratic? Why does he go from ally to kind of neo Silver Age villain again and then back to anti-hero?
Yeah. And then I have more things I want to talk about, but I want to stop and let us have another go round. But I just really think that even though the scene on its face is quite dull, for the X-Men continuity nerd, which 3 of us are, it's actually really exciting because it's Hickman doing this scalpel precision repair on continuity that's always been a little bit torn apart. And so to me, that was really fun to read, even though I recognize for most readers, probably not that exciting.
Yeah.
So the thing is, is Forge has ever been part of X-Men, or he was mostly kind of villain, or what's his story?
Never a villain, something of an antagonist in his early appearances. But for most of the character's history, either an active or auxiliary member of the X-Men or another X team.
Yeah, I mean, he was briefly, I think, part of Freedom Force, I think. But I mean, I think he was reporting to Val Cooper.
So he was never a member of Freedom Force. He was contracted out by them to build the weapon that took away Storm's power.
Yep. And then after that, he was part of the Muir Island X-Men for a while before the whole X-Men blue and go, and then he just left.
Yeah, I think the thing that's important is that he's typically quite at arm's length from Xavier. In that first passage of Forge before Xavier goes to Shi'ar space and Uncanny X-Men 200, he's not really with the X-Men. And then a lot of his interaction with the X-Men comes while Xavier's gone. And then this conversation, what's so interesting about it is that Xavier and Forge really have no relationship here, which is something that it's easy to forget. And I even forgot the first time I read it, but based on where it is, they don't. And then after Forge's 20 issue, not even dalliance with living in the X-Mansion while he's doing these repairs, I think, he leaves again, and he then after that is a member of X Factor. So he's not really a core X-Men the way that we think of other kind of late Claremont mutants like Psylocke or Gambit or something like that as a core member of the X-Men.
Yeah.
Right. But he also has like a very dumb power, like talking to, techno, like Tony Stark can do that.
Well, a power that, like Doug Ramsey, is proving to be extraordinarily useful in the context of this story, especially.
But that's a very interesting power, though. But the thing is, like his power, how is like he's different than Tony Stark? Like,
Well, that's why he's not an Omega mutant, right? You were the one who established that in earlier issues. Because I guess, I don't know, Zach Tyler, chime in, but like my read on his power has always been, if he can picture the function of something, he probably can build the thing. Like he has the mutant power of reverse engineering.
Well, I mean, the way I look at it is give him a problem and he will solve it using machine.
Yeah, but
that was what I was like. He built stuff to solve a problem. So you give him,
Yeah, but the thing is, like with all the other mutants, I feel like their power is natural. Like it's like something to do with nature. But the thing is, like this is something. It feels kind of odd that his power is based on something man-made, like technology man-made.
But as we learn in this issue, it has turned out to transfer into the organic materials of Krakoa. So this capacity to invent actually does extend to biological things.
And
right, but
sorry, go ahead.
Go for it. No, go for it. I'm sorry.
No, and for this, I mean, in particular to this point about biological machines, I feel like Forge is solving the problem of X3. I mean, the 10 to the power of 3 lifetime. About the machines needing, the machines that are shown, the phalanx that are shown later on, it seems to be non-biological. Like last Powers of 10, they say that they cannot absorb the biological shell, but
and then Forge sort of bridges that.
Yeah, that's what I'm thinking. Like he's building a biological machine right now. So this is like both things are like combined together.
Yeah, in a way, even though Forge has been featured on many occasions as a major X-Men character, he is getting a little bit of a gold balls glow up here, where it's kind of goodness, kind of to your point, Bria, like, oh, his power seemed lame before, but maybe that's because he was constraining himself to working with technology, but that's not part of the scene. Now we're getting to speculating. I think one thing that's interesting about the scene before we move on to the data pages that come after is Forge is like, well, we need unlimited power and unlimited storage, and Xavier's like on it, which kind of, again, lends a little bit more context to why Claremont keeps him in Shi'ar space for 80 issues. It's not because he hates the X-Men, it's because he's getting shit ready.
Well, and I think we may yet learn that there was other shit he was getting ready too, since we know that there's something to do with the Shi'ar Golem at some point with Mark.
You just like saying that.
I do very much enjoy saying that. But we know that there seem to be all sorts of plans that he's hatching while he's out there regarding this Krakoa scheme, and his time with the Shi'ar seems to be when he's gathering the technological ability to do that. Now, one other thing in this scene that did stand out to me, which I really don't know what to make of at this point, is they discuss having 5 different cradle terminals to save this data as redundancies. And in explaining why he wants 5, Xavier makes this very pointed reference to having an additional one for ellipsis, unforeseen complications, in italics. And he's phrasing this in a way that suggests to me very strongly that these complications are not the least bit unforeseen. I have no idea what he's referring to. I don't know what it's going to be, but it seems like Xavier knows that something is up that requires that 5th backup. So there you have it.
The one thing that stood out to me as a new X fan is I did like a bandana or whatever it is that he has. I mean, that's a major fashion choice for someone with that mustache to add that to their head. I'm like, I was kind of thinking about his grooming process every morning. What does he do? He gets up, he puts that on, he kind of trims his mustache a little bit, and then goes about make things. And also,
well, I wish we had come prepared with the very first entrance shot that he has in his first appearance, because I promise you it would blow your mind.
Oh my God. Can someone please find that? Because I need my mind blown. And also, Professor X's eyebrows were always kind of tilted in the rock style. That he was always like, what do you mean? You need more data? More unlimited backup? I can provide unlimited backup with I'm like, what? Man, calm down.
I mean, especially in this scene, right? You have shots and shots after shots of Professor X looking evil. I mean, that's the only way I can explain it. It looks like,
but now that I put side by side, he kind of looks like Zach a little bit. Zach, do the eyebrow.
A little bit.
Zach, do the eyebrow thing. Can you do that? Do the eyebrow thing.
I don't think I'm physically capable of that.
To get one that high, you gotta really.
yeah.
That's his mutant powers, those eyebrows.
Seriously, guys, you should all do this. I have it in my laptop side by side. Yep, pretty much Zach like.
But here's an interesting thing about Forge talking about his early appearance. He's colored quite white here. Forge is a member of, is he a Cheyenne American Indian? He's an indigenous First People.
Yeah.
And he is pretty freaking white in this appearance. Like,
so this is absolutely true. I would say that there is something very weird going on with the lighting in this scene, though.
Yeah.
And I don't think, because look at his costume. I think that's supposed to be a standard issue yellow and black X-Men uniform, and it looks positively white. So I don't know why he and Xavier seem to be standing under this like bizarre super white industrial lighting, but I think that that's what's supposed to be going on with the coloring here.
I don't know if I buy that for the whitewashing of a character. Like, come on. I think that colorists get a little too tricksy with the lighting sometimes, and at the point that we're using the lighting as an excuse to whitewash a very prominent person of color on the X-Men, I think you failed in your job as a
I agree. And I want to give the colorist the benefit of the doubt here, but it's probably not the best move.
Hang on. Hold on. We're going to try with color. Personal color here. How does it look? Do I look?
Are you trying to make yourself look white? Is that what?
Look at it. I'm like a white person now.
No, you're not.
Don't think it works that way.
But I'm just trying to see if actually, what if it was a colorist fault or it was a shading issue.
But we're talking about the colorist and the setting. What do we make of this sea life background? So Hickman, in every scene in this issue, Hickman is handing RB Silva a opportunity to flex, and I'm going to get into this a lot in the next scene. But even knowing that Forge has this set up in Eagle Plaza, what is the significance of Hickman scripting it as Under the Sea?
Well, Peter, I got to tell you, right before this show, I fell down a little bit of a philosophical Twitter rabbit hole with myself, and I've got a little bit of a theory that I'm going to get to when we get to the final aspect of this issue, because I think that's the most relevant place to talk about it. But I do have a theory for this.
Okay.
All right.
And for the benefit of Furia, right? Like, I mean, Forge is not just. He doesn't just have his power as a mutant. He's also a shaman.
Occasionally. When it's too
occasionally, but no one remembers it after Fall of the Mutants. Is that what you're? You're saying, right?
The fact that he's not white explains so much of his fashion choices, because I'm like, what is he doing? But that explains it. But the thing is,
I think the fact that he's an 80s character created by John Romita Jr. explains his fashion choices, because if you look at any character in the 80s drawn by John Romita Jr., they all have the most exceptionally ridiculous outfits.
Yeah.
But the fact that
I have his first appearance ready for us here.
Can we throw this up? Can we do this? Yeah, because this is beautiful. It's genuinely beautiful.
I just wanted to say before we do that, it's like the fact that he's still wearing his underwear outside. Come on now. No.
That was the training uniform at the time, but
oh yeah. Hello, ladies.
Hi, ladies.
Good afternoon, ladies. Welcome to my house. You know what the best part is? I'll bet he was standing in that pose for 25 minutes before they actually got to the door.
It almost, speaking of our intro music, it almost does have a little bit of a Freddie Mercury aspect to it. For some reason.
I've seen this picture so many times. I never made I never saw that was Forge. I never made
his first appearance. It's the first time we see him.
That is his first panel.
I mean, I don't listen. I mean, this is going to sound bad. I do know a lot of indigenous people. None of them is pink like that. I can tell you that. That is really bad. Hey, listen, this is an upgrade from that. He got a major upgrade. His mustache is better. He has the ribbon thing to go with it. It's a major upgrade.
But he actually looks
a lot.
Well, he actually looks a bit well, not a lot, but like a bit of Burke Reynolds here.
Yeah, I think there was always that aspect to how he was drawn back in the day. I would agree. Yeah.
Anyway, we have
is there anything else to say before the data pages? I think we probably could move to the data page.
We should.
Yeah, let's just move on to the data page.
So the data page here, it's just one, and it's just kind of notes on Cerebro, which apparently we're on version 7.0 right now. So Freya, our engineer on the panel, what did you make of these data pages?
It's like a how to use a manual. I really appreciated it, and it also tells me how the data gets backed up. Also reminded me to come home and hard back up my phone. I haven't done this in a while. Everyone, you should also always hard back up your phone. So that's what I got out of this.
Our public service announcement for today's episode. So I find myself in a little bit of a logistical problem here, and maybe I'm just misreading this. So I want you all to tell me if I am. But we are told in this data page that it takes Xavier 3 days of intensive concentration to do an initial upload of a mutant mind. But we have previously been told that Cerebro contains and must at some point download into husks 16 million mutant minds, the Genosian genocide population of mutant kind. So if you crunch those numbers, that would have taken Charles Xavier by himself 48 million days to do the initial upload of every single one of those lives. Xavier does not have that many thousands of years to have gotten all of those initial files into Cerebro. So what is going on here? Did Hickman flub the math, or was there some other process for getting them on?
I think it's 3 hours to do the whole multiple redundant. I think 3 hours meant the whole process.
But it says this process takes 3 days during which it cannot be interrupted and Xavier cannot be disturbed.
So the 3 days is to upload everything, to do a fresh upload everything. So, and then the 3 hours is to do the incremental.
Yes, that was my read as well.
So that's the way he's thinking. You're doing it. He's not uploading them into the husk. He's putting them into.
So you think every mutant on the planet takes a total of 3 days?
Yeah,
apparently. Yeah.
Okay, that I will believe.
Yeah,
I will take that math to the bank.
Yeah.
But here's what one of the things that really kind of bothers me about this whole thing. Xavier knows everyone's dirty little secret.
Well.
Well, that's always been the case with him.
Yeah, that's always.
I know, but this is kind of weird. Now he's walking around with it. That's
the thing that struck me along those same lines is he's doing this without consent, right? Like if this was a medical procedure, we would all have to give informed consent to have our mind copied. But he doesn't have anything resembling informed consent from anybody, not only the X-Men, but we're talking about mutant villains, mutant civilians who are just living their lives. Like he's made this decision for them, which definitely informs the creepiness of last issue. Like, yeah, they might all be together and happy now, but he's been doing this on their behalf without their permission for a decade.
Yeah.
I mean, the thing is, though, all the people who were dead, I think they're giving their informed consent by being dead.
Are they? Did they want to come back?
I don't know.
I mean, some of I don't know.
Yeah,
I think
they
there's
want
some
their
really
minds
thorny
and their souls
ethical
stored on 5 separate hard drives by Charles Francis Xavier. And I mean, to some extent, it's just a logical progression of the moral questionability that Cerebro always was, because he's always been sitting on this device that can and does access the innermost thoughts of any mutant anywhere on the planet at any time. And they never did know about it. And so now we're just sort of taking that to like, what is the most sort of promising or horrifying extension of that, which is he's actually saving your mind on his computer.
Well, and there's always been a paternalistic aspect to that, right? Like the whole idea of them finding mutants was with the idea of like, we're finding you for your own good, right? Because we're the X-Men. And if you just popped up, you don't know how to control your power, and you could be at threat because you're hated and feared. And that in itself is paternalistic, but at least people could turn him down. Like Dazzler basically says when they find her, like, hey, I'm not going to join right now. But this takes it a whole step further in terms of paternalism of like, oh, and by the way, I'm going to back you up just in case something happens to you, but don't worry about it. I'm not going to tell you.
Well, you could say in a sense that he's sort of consuming them phalanx, like with or without their permission. They are going to be a part of this larger mutant entity for the cause of mutant kind, whether they want to or not.
Right.
And then they are also being saved into 5 other places, which is like, what is the security for them? Like, what is like one of them is getting, what if my mind gets hacked, you guys? Like, you know, and then if you had one thought that I don't like Xavier, you get bumped back down in your list of regeneration. That's how it's happening. You get bumped back down.
Well, and let's talk about one last detail on this page. Only a very experienced psychic could reboot themselves, and Xavier has done it twice. Do we have any speculation as to what Hickman is indicating here in terms of when Xavier has done it? I have a few.
Well, I mean, the first thing is this: like when he said Xavier has done this twice, right? Immediately, my thought is the same as you, that he replaced his mind twice, but it's not continuous with that paragraph, right? So it could be referring to, say, he combined two different husk and mind twice. You know, or
the phrasing is just ambiguous enough to allow for the possibility that he's rebooting somebody other than himself.
Yeah, that too.
But I think, especially because we've learned in these recent data pages that Hickman likes to actually be pretty forthright with his reference. And he does the previous bracket legacy version, which really tracks pretty well to Xavier kind of rebuilding his own mind at the beginning of Mike Carey's X-Men Legacy, which we know that Hickman loves. And it kind of gives us a pre-existing device whereby he was able to do that.
Right.
Well, his mind, if I remember correctly, at the beginning of that run was reconstructed by Exodus, however.
Well, is it? Yeah, I guess. But doesn't he go wandering around trying to fill in some of the memories?
So yes, Hickman could be inserting a retcon that somewhere during that Mike Carey run, when Xavier is reconstructing his memories and thoughts, he has in fact installed a previous version of his mind software.
But again, I see this. I'm sorry, I'm jumping in so quickly, and we keep missing Freya. Freya, go on.
No, I was just gonna say, one of the question that I wanted to ask you is, you all, if you have given a chance to read your mind and then upload a legacy version, would you?
I think there would have to be a purpose to it. And, if Mike Carey's run is in fact one of them, then we still don't know what the other one was. And it seems like maybe Hickman is saving that for a revelation, for one final surprise here, to explain why something might have occurred or some part of this plan came into effect that would have required Xavier to wipe clean his own memory of something he did or saw.
Right, because the idea is that he's got to make a conscious decision to do it. Mm-hmm. And in the case of his brain being damaged, it's obvious why you would make a conscious decision, because he wants to be back to his fully functioning version. But otherwise, to Zach's point, it would have to be because he's seen or experienced or been marked in some way by something that he doesn't feel like it's going to serve this moral cause. And we could speculate about Cassandra Nova. We could speculate about one of the times, after the Psy War and Hunt for Xavier, we could speculate about after he comes back from being dead in Avengers vs. X-Men and is in Phantom X's body. There's a number of times that it might be a better idea for him to forget about what most recently has happened to him. But I do agree that Hickman's probably saving that revelation for a future bombshell.
But it just makes it Charles to be a weirder character in a way.
Yep. Hickman's making him progressively less human.
Yeah, because
well, honestly, we probably crossed the threshold of Xavier ever being a totally sympathetic character somewhere around 2005. There was no going back at that point.
Yeah, we're
all in at this point.
Right. No, let me just saying, it's okay, because we human, even though it's the worst memory you have, you learn from it and you move on. That's a sign of a good leader. If it was some other rando, I wouldn't care. But he's supposed to be the leader of X-Men, and as a leader, you should be holding on to all of your memories so you can learn and not repeat the mistake. But
what if he's doing it to protect the secrets? So he's
there's
overriding
that too. If he knows that somebody else is going to get hold of what he knows or of his mind,
so it's easier to wipe it out and replace it with nothing.
And then he doesn't remember it himself. That's even weird.
Well, but he has done it already.
Yeah. Honestly, I don't care.
I think it's going to come. I do think it's going to come into play. It's one of those things why would Hickman bother to write it if it's not going to be significant?
But speaking of knowing things and remembering them, the other little nugget of information that we get here is the name Moira's No Place as one of the cradle locations. And this is our first piece of evidence as to where Moira actually is in this life of ours right now. We don't find out any more than that, but she is apparently in some Krakoan tumor somewhere.
And he's also on on the list, which is the unforeseen.
Number 5, the unforeseen complication backup.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
Any speculation about Summer House or the Point?
Wherever Vulcan's hiding.
Well, the thing is, like, it's again playing with words, right? Is this belonging to the Summers, or is it a summer house, like a vacation home? So, you know, I mean, I think it's meant to think. I don't know. It can be both.
Yeah. And Island M, is that referring to Magneto's old school Lovecraftian islands?
That's the name that Hickman bestowed upon the Lovecraftian island earlier in the series. So I assume that is where one of them is.
Yeah. Summer House, I mean, we frequently do go to a house in Alaska. Where I believe that's where Scott Summers has that encounter with Sinister that we looked at a couple of issues ago. So some interesting references there.
But
I mean, he first met Maddie there too.
Yeah.
But the thing is, my question is, if these are like known X-Men places to go, anyone will put their mind to it, will be finding out. Like, you know.
No, I'm not sure that they are all known
right.
places. The House of X, of course, is new. That's on Krakoa. More is
Right.
no
Right.
place
And so where was it
Krakoa.
6 months ago?
Right.
Yeah.
All right. Okay. So shall we move on to the next?
One more thing. The Shia crystals. I think we have seen it in issue 1.
Yeah.
In issue 1 of Powers?
Of House.
When do you think we saw that?
I think it wasn't brought up, but I think it's drawn as crystals in one of the scene, the hub scene, when the Cuckoos bring the few
that may be so.
through.
I think we certainly saw them in the Powers of 10 issue where the crystal was sort of put into Mora to carry back to Life 10.
Yep.
Yeah.
So yeah.
All right. Okay.
So, anyway,
let's move on to year 10 because this is what I want to talk about.
Oh, me too.
Yes.
Okay.
All right.
So Emma apparently has a meeting spot staked out in the Louvre in Paris with Xavier, only she is not at the location that Xavier might expect in the Louvre. She's standing in front of Nike of Samothrace, which I have right here and we'll be talking about shortly. And she doesn't really know why he wants to meet with her, but it turns out that he's brought Magneto along and they have a very bold proposal to buy her into the future of the mutant race. And we see that play out across 2 locations here in this scene, which probably has only been taking place within the last 6 or 7 months, given the vintage of the characters that we're seeing here. So, Freya, why don't you begin? Hello?
Have we lost Freya?
If it just froze on a perfect Freya face, so we couldn't tell she wasn't there. Well, while we're waiting for Freya to regenerate, why don't we start with Zach?
So, the first thing to note, lest it go unmentioned, is our introductory establishing shot is the Louvre glass pyramid, which I think is supposed to make us think of the pyramid that Apocalypse was in, that housed the tombs of his original horsemen, which in turn echoes the design of the Tower of the House of M, our symbol of ascension. So Hickman, again, playing with that same set of ascension tower imagery that he's had all throughout this series.
Sorry, guys. I was out. I'm back.
Now you're back.
Yeah.
So how would you like to address this this initial scene in Paris, Freya?
No, I was just gonna say that first thing actually. That very first page, like, you know, I just kind of as soon as it said everyone out, I'm like, oh, Emma's there. That was my first. That was my first reaction right away. I'm like, Emma's there. I'm like, ha ha ha. And then I saw Professor X. I'm like, oh, he's a repeat dresser. He wore the same outfit that he took to the war in the UN. I did not care for that. I'm like, come on, sir, you can have multiple outfits. I just love the whole scene, like, you know, the whole, like, you know, the bitch slap, like, you know, how she's kind of put Xavier in his place. And then they kind of go to this other thing, for the children, sure, I'll do it. And then all the negotiation that happened, like everything about this whole scene and the interaction was perfect for me. Like, I just loved it so much. And then, yes, so that's all I have to say. But, you know, I'm going to say more, but keep talking.
Well, I mean, for the children, the bit on For the Children has a little bit of history, right? Because, I mean, Emma lost her first group of students, Hellions. They were all murdered and killed. And then she was also the headmistress for the Gen Xers. So
yeah, she has in point of fact lost several groups of students, one after another.
Exactly. I don't know if I would be signing up for her school at this point.
Once is an accident, Emma.
7th time is your fault.
I know, but I mean, so when she said for the children, I mean, it's not really kind of an offhand comment. Offhand comment. It's actually, I mean, I think it actually meant something for her. Like, she really wanted to do this for the children.
And this is purely speculative, but right before we see her on Krakoa agreeing to those terms, when the Krakoan flower is presented to her, the planter that it's in is the precise design of the seer self that we saw in X3 that contained the consciousness of the Elder. And so I just wonder, is there anybody inside of that? Does that contain one of her former dead students? Does it contain someone that she knows? I mean, is it more than the flower? Is she being shown proof of precisely why she should be doing this to children?
So the one question I wanted to ask though is like, can Magneto's helmet protect him from Emma's power as well? Like,
sure, it's an anti-telepathy.
Okay, cool. Continue. Sorry.
Well, I mean, I think you wanted. What about Peter? What do you think about this?
Wow, so much. Okay, so I think we have to start by talking about the location stuff because it has a big import. And we get, you know how we always talk about how Zach in his life has specifically prepared for this moment because he knows all of the stuff that who knew it would ever apply to X-Men. Well, here's me and my knowledge about these 2 sculptures in the Louvre, my favorite 2 sculptures in the Louvre that I actually went back to see a second time when I was in Paris. And the Nike, which... Let's start from the beginning. So Nike of Samothrace. Samothrace is a small island, and it was an island. Let me bring up some notes here. Where there was a mystery cult to the great gods. And this statue was situated in the sanctuary of the great gods, and it's actually to celebrate a naval victory. And if you see it in the Louvre, it's been reconstructed such that the base actually thrusts forward, and you can see that it's built as though it's on the prow of a ship. Of course, it would never really be on the prow of a ship because it's made of marble. But in the context that it was carved and displayed, it was because it was celebrating a great naval victory. But Nike is the goddess of victory. It's winged victory. That's the term Nike that some of us have shoes of is based on this in real life. And so it's really interesting that Emma decides to choose to be in the Grand Hall with Nike because originally Professor Xavier says that he expects to see her at a different statue. And that statue is... Psyche revived by Cupid's kiss, which is a really interesting, different story that has some parallels to Pandora's box. Psyche goes into the underworld. She comes back with this, what's supposed to be a piece of preternatural beauty, but it's actually a piece of undying sleep. And so she falls asleep and she's revived. But Emma is like, no, I'm not going to locate myself at the statue that is about a woman being saved by a god. I'm going to be locating myself of this marble statue that could be thought of as another White Queen, even though it's not made of diamond. But the interesting thing there, and then I'll take a breath and let some other people chime in, is that Nike, is a symbol of victory at sea. It's said that, you can see the motion in the folds of her dress here because she's supposed to be kind of alighting on the edge of a ship. Emma is about to be the White Queen on the ship in Marauders. She doesn't know that when she's locating herself in this scene. She later makes light of the East India Trading Company, which we can get into the history of. But it's kind of like Hickman authorially winking at us that it's like, Emma's about to be setting sail and sea. But also, can we actually make the jump narratively that Emma maybe draws some inspiration from this, possibly her favorite work there in Louvre. So there's my little hard history corner.
Well, and you didn't say, but you strongly implied that this plays into the theme of maritime sea that pops up over and over again in every sequence of this issue.
Right. It's not just this scene and the under the sea moment with Namor. This whole sequence again is framed with the maritime power and naval prowess. And then you're gonna have something to say in the last thing. So this the intro music was almost Under the Sea from Little Mermaid, because that is clearly the theme of this episode, even if Hickman was more subtle in some of the scenes than others.
Well, and very interestingly, by the way, the Psyche that she was turning away from, that of course, that goddess is the personification in Greek of psyche, psyche, which means soul, and later was equated with the mind. It's the very thing that Xavier is storing and then downloading into mutant husks, and she is turning away from that in favor of victory on the sea. So I think that that's Emma's implicit and perhaps accidental, perhaps deliberate statement of where she will be positioning herself in this new Krakoan order.
Yeah, and I also thought that there was something interesting to her turning away from Psyche. If you're reading this as coming maybe a little bit after that Rosenberg run in Uncanny that we just read, because that was like her trying to contain things all by herself, and she gets burnt by it, and she winds up kind of being put in prison and kept under lock and key. It's not a direct analogy to Psyche, but it almost feels like Xavier is kind of trying to make light of her making a play similar to his play, making the world forget about the X-Men, and failing. And she's like, no, I'm going to recast that. You can't tell me what my narrative was. We're going to go meet in front of the Nikkei instead.
Right. And the thing is, like, I just loved the whole sequence of the negotiation that happened between Xavier, Magneto, and Emma about, like, you know, the new forming. It's kind of like forming a new government. It's like a dealing of like, okay, this is what I'm going to give you, and in return, you're going to do this for me. Like, it's just like, I just loved it. Like, this is what I wanted mutants to be. Like, you know, no longer.
I think it was. I mean, I enjoyed this sequence tremendously. I do think it's funny, and I reflected on this only later after reading it, that so many people reacted to the last House of X issue by talking about how creepy and alarming the Krakoan naked rituals were. I don't think anybody reacted with the slightest bit of outrage that Xavier is very openly proposing that Emma take over his illegal drug smuggling operation. I mean, that's what he's asking her to do. I need you to recruit a known criminal that you formerly defeated so that you can smuggle my drugs into sovereign nations that will not otherwise accept them.
Well, hold on. What's so outrageous about that? That is an awesome thing to do. That's what I would do. I mean, you know, have your black ops ready to go. Like, you know, that's how you reform a government. It's not just everything that is like up and up. You also need to figure out your CIA operation. This is what Emma and Sebastian Shaw is going to bring.
I find it fascinating that people are more outraged by the religious ritual than by the open engagement in criminal activity.
Well, not only that, but there's clear links to our theme of colonialism here too, with Emma invoking the East India Trading Company, which was as much about trading power as political power, and at one point had an army more sizable than the British, or the naval fleet, more sizable than the British naval fleet. There's clear echoes of history of colonialism here that Emma is like, hey, let's go. But people are just like, Emma's a bad bitch, let's make it happen. But there are troubling themes.
As someone from Bangladesh, I know all about East India Trading Company.
Oh, please, Faria. Here now we get Faria's history corner.
Please. So East India Trading Company was a shady company run by the British Empire, and they pretty much came to Indian Empire. I'm like, you know, that was India, Pakistan, Bangladesh were all together at that time to say that, hey, if you let us come and do business, I mean, we're just going to do business. However, in lieu of bringing employees, they were actually bringing in soldiers. And then pretty much overnight, they overthrew the entire Indian government and took over the country. That's what happened. And they were in the country for 200 years, only left after their entire troops were depleted after World War II, because they just could not support it anymore. And that's why they left. India was one of the country who won their independence without actually going into war. But however, before leaving, they decided to tear the country apart by saying they're going to put Pakistan and now Bangladesh as West Pakistan and East Pakistan, and they're going to put them together just by the virtue that they're both Muslim populated country. They also displaced Indian Muslim population from India to give them the option either to move to Bangladesh or to Pakistan. Something you can find if you read G. Willow Wilson's Miss Marvel, because that is also her history of her ancestors. So
this is a very important history corner, actually. And people who don't know about this part of world history should certainly read up on it. It is both fascinating and relevant.
Yes.
And there's a particular episode of the most recent Doctor Who run that deals with a little bit of this, which was really, really good episode too.
Right, and the thing is though, like, I mean, in British colonization in India has its it has its perks as well, because they have done a lot of stuff by putting in railroads, like getting rid of bridal burning after like that was the whole ritual of burning the bride along with the groom, even after their death, even though the grooms were 80 years old and the brides were 10 or 15-year old, like underage children. They kind of did a lot of those things. However, it happened because there were people within the community who actually forced them into doing this, and people didn't react to it because it's like, oh, they're the laws and we need to listen to them. So there are ups and downs on that, but at the same time, they also depleted the entire country of its resources. So
yeah.
So I think this gets to a large part of the ambivalence that we're seeing here about the presentation of the mutants on Krakoa. That we have, on the one hand, the building of a new and modern and extremely promising society, but at the same time, this creation of these kind of shady, underhanded smuggling operations and trading companies working with known criminals, and Xavier and his pith helmet and Jodhpurs in a previous issue.
But the thing is, like, to be honest, though, it's needed in order for that small country island of Krakoa to prosper. They need to do these kind of shady things, because I think that's something they have learned either from Moira or just by existing all this time, that they cannot be fair with human. They have to do these kind of rather shady things in order to survive.
And I think that's what comes into Emma's reaction. So Xavier and Magneto kind of deal her in, and she says, "You want me to become the East India Trading Company of Mutantism, don't you?" And Xavier answers yes, and she says, "I won't lie, I like the taste of it." And she, she's already thought through all of these things. She's the one who gives the name to it, not Xavier and Magneto. She's the one who's implying we're going to go in under the auspices of trade, but we're going to create and sow political unrest perhaps in these places and instability. This is why they're approaching her. Emma has this brain. It doesn't take her that long to get there.
Yeah.
And it is why she asks for the third seat on the council, because Emma knows that she can go a negative way. She has Shaw on one side. So why does she want a third seat instead of just two? And I think we're going to get into that a little bit later.
Yeah. And that was the reason I gave Faria earlier, as she asked the same reason. She asked, like, why the third seat and why this person, and I gave her almost exactly the same reason as you just mentioned.
Right.
But before we move on to those data pages about the government, final round on our scene here with Emma. Faria?
So oh, I'm sorry, go ahead.
No, I just had to say that I loved the reaction, like how Xavier and Magneto was kind of tiptoeing around Emma while they were negotiating. It's like, we're gonna give you 30 years, and it's like, like as I was saying, 50 years. Like, I just loved that scene. And then also it's like, oh, we're gonna give you 2 seats too. Why? And then they just looked at each other. It's like, do you want to go? Do you want to tell her? Like, I just loved everything about that. And so I mean, that's just this whole thing. And the whole idea about like how ex-mutants are finally rebuilding their government and all of that. I just loved it.
Zach?
So I am once again to file away in the specifically chosen phrases file folder. We have Xavier talking about the growth of the government by saying, it's the spark that sets things in motion, to which Magneto replies, and what begins as a fire will grow to an inferno, which is a fascinating choice of words to speak on the island that may or may not sit above a chasm that leads directly into limbo.
Yeah, I mean, I caught that too. I was like, oh, wait. Are they talking? I mean, are we seeing the middle of his run event, as Inferno 2 or something? But then
it's moments like that, like unforeseen complications, where it sometimes feels like these characters are just pausing to stare directly at the camera for a few seconds before we move on.
Yeah. And then the other thing is that we have been talking about capes. I mean, look at Emma's clothes here. Look at the way it's flowing and drawn here. I mean, obviously,
Silva is the master of capes. I think is what we've discovered in the course of the series.
Okay, after this,
just look at this.
Hang on, hold on. You got. Everyone should look at this. Like, can we bring capes back, or can we have capes now? Can we please walk around with capes? Like go to
Exodus,
office.
Storm,
by the way, with a giant
people
gold
can-
X buckle on the front.
Yeah, the Flava Flav seems a little bit much for Emma. But Zach, am I wrong in saying that tower in the distance echoes a tower we've been seeing frequently as a motif in the art here? Because it looks real familiar to me.
It absolutely does. It looks to me, I mean, we are staring yet again at the Tower of Ascension that she is pointing her eyes directly at.
Right. It kind of also reminded me a little bit like Sinister's one, but maybe I'm misremembering. Like it just
I think that this motif has been repeated. It was repeated in the future on the tarot card at Sinister. We've seen it repeatedly. It's actually also kind of echoes the shape of Nimrod the Greater a little bit with those twinned designs. It's definitely an art motif that's recurring, just like the fingerprints.
I mean, every location that we have seen right now, with the exception of that, underwater thing, this motif has been there, either very obviously or somehow implied somewhere. So it is definitely there.
Right. So do we want to save these data pages for the end? Because I think we have a more spoilerific discussion to be doing.
So Zach, why don't you give us a little bit of context about why we're not doing the data pages right now?
So on this data page, which discusses the breakdown and makeup of the Quiet Council of Krakoa, the governing structure, there are spots on the council that are deliberately redacted. They're blacked out, and we are not in this issue supposed to know who those members of the council are. A day after this issue came out, it was published online that PDF review copies of this issue allowed the reader to highlight those redacted lines and discover who the members of the council are. So this is now known to anyone who chooses to seek out the information. And it seems in our position as informed critics of this issue that we should discuss it with the maximum amount of knowledge available to us and others. However, we don't want to spoil coming issues for people who don't want to hear it. So we have agreed as a group to come back to this section later on to talk about the full unredacted council lineup, but to do it once we've given you fair spoiler warning for what's going to happen.
And that's
at the end. And as somebody who has output hundreds, if not thousands, of things for publication from art, that is such a rookie move.
Yeah. No, it's
I mean, Zach used to work in book publishing too.
I know.
Really? Really, Marvel?
It is. If I could suggest
PDF
to the folks at Marvel Comics that Adobe Pro Suite may be an investment worth making.
No,
just consider it, Marvel.
Yeah, I mean, there's a reason why that function is called a highlighter. Just changing the highlighter color to black does not mean that the words are being
same thing.
It's not hidden. It's not the same. It's like, come on, people.
I would propose the possibility. First of all, these issues are coming out very fast and remaining on schedule, so things will slip through the cracks. And of the things to slip through the cracks, these data pages probably come direct via Hickman from the graphic designer Tom Muller. So Marvel may not have even thought to alter the way that it was created when they received it.
I agree. Here's some inside baseball about print production, everybody.
I don't know about that. I have a feeling that this was done done intentionally.
Well, speaking of done intentionally, there is one that you can make out on the page on the Comixology version that I do not think was a mistake. I think it was just them giving us an Easter egg. So we'll talk about that later.
All right. Yeah. Okay. So let's keep moving because I that I want to talk about this next one more.
Oh yeah. So now we're in the present day, almost, maybe like a week prior to the present day or minutes prior. And we see Xavier issuing the psychic summons to all of the villains who showed up in our last issue, House of X #5. And we see number them here that we saw there. We see Exodus, we see Gorgon, which is cool. But the whole reason this seems to be happening is to give us a scene with Xavier and our very good friend of the Undersea Abs, Namor the Submariner. A favorite character of much of the panel here.
I mean, I've been since the issue 1, since House of X, I've been kind of saying that, okay, first, where's Namor? Is Namor a mutant? Is he coming? I kept on asking you guys, is he still a mutant? Guys, is he coming? And then, it was so good. Oh my god, I cannot
So brief,
believe.
but so satisfying.
So satisfying. That bitch slap. That is like that one panel where he's like, I don't know if you were showing that. That one panel that is in the next page. No, that one, right over there, right there. Yeah, the one in the middle, where he's saying that. Hang on, I need to say it. It's good that you have finally figured this out. But let me ask you, do I strike you as someone who's just now realized how much better I am than everyone else? Marry me. Marry me, Namor.
Yeah,
Like,
it's one page, but it's got so much.
So much sass. So much. I want to adopt. I don't know whether I want to adopt him or I want to fuck him or what I want to do with him. It's just so good. You guys, it's so good. And the thing is, this is exactly how I operate in life. Like, it's like, do you think I am like, I am just realizing I'm better than you? I always.
Yeah, that did ring really true for me too. Because I'm such an asshole. I've actually had people say the reverse of that. Like, you think you're better than everybody. I'm like, have you just figured out that I think that I'm better than everybody?
And also, Chuck had the audacity to send his projection instead of showing up there to tell an emperor, like a king of 70% of the world, that you need to leave your throne to come to our little dumb island where we're not even going to give you a seat, or we're maybe going to give you one seat in the council. Bitch, please get the fuck out of here. Like, I just could not deal with that. Like, it's so good. But I do want to say another thing, though, is like when he was calling Sinister, what was Sinister doing?
Sinister here has murdered all of his clones and is now packing a suitcase full of blood samples. He's like, as one does before one goes on a trip.
Yeah.
I'm like, what is it? What was he doing?
That's the panel. You guys were all about Namor. I was just delighted by Sinister murdering a room full of clones and then packing his blood sample suitcase.
No, but was he doing that? And that point, Xavier just showed up. Like,
right? Like, was this just what happens?
This is convenient timing, Charles. Certainly.
Thank you, Charles. Can you show us that panel, please? Like, look at that. Oh, what the hell is he doing? Like, what? Or are they all orgasmed to sleep? I thought that it was a sex orgy. I thought that it was an orgy with himself. And then he's like, I'm going to put this. Like, what is going on?
Wow. Like, Faria, this was a very, very horny issue for Faria, apparently. I was earning us that TVMA rating here on the Hickman report.
And the fact that Faria is thinking that this is an orgy, and what Saviors was saying there is join us.
Makes me want to rewatch Sense8.
Oh,
so
yeah.
We do know that he has the raw power of eroticism.
Describe that about Sense8.
Tyler and I have a long history of
I know
the orgies on Sense8. So, Zach, please save us.
Yes, Zach.
Let's move along to X to the third power.
No,
X-Men the year 1000.
Maria's the only one who talked about Namor so far. You have nothing to say about Namor?
I'm not quite sure how to read this Namor scene. There's obviously something going on here because Namor gets the final quote. So there is a significance to this scene. And it's also a deep sea scene, which of course it puts us centrally in this theme of the sea that we've seen throughout the issue. But I don't know exactly what Hickman is doing yet.
But here's also one of the things that came to my mind. Is Atlantan, what are they called? Atlanteans? Atlantis. Is Atlantis considered a nation in Marvel Universe?
Oh, sure. And you I know that you have read series that acknowledge this because Atlantis has something of a checkered history with Wakanda.
No, I mean now. I'm talking about now. As of now. Is it still a nation?
Well, so one might be interested in the implications of this scene on Chip Zdarsky's Invaders series. Not because Namor is going ham on the surface world in Invaders, but because Xavier has a huge part of why Namor is acting the way that he is. And it has some retcon Xavier moments which fit very neatly, as it turns out, with Xavier's moments sequence here that we've seen over the course of X to the power of 0 with Hickman. So you have to wonder, this is the first like true connection we've seen with the rest of the Marvel Universe. You have to wonder where this Namor scene is posed in terms of the run of Invaders. Invaders 2 weeks ago did make a reference to the things happening on Krakoa here. So we are definitely seeing an integration with the current Marvel Universe. And if you have not been reading Zdarsky's Invaders and you love Namor and you love Xavier Namor standoffs, please pick it up. It is, in my opinion, the best comic book that is coming out in 2019. And I read something like 60 new comic books every week. It's the best one.
I would say that I don't think it's a coincidence that we've seen that now both Atlantis and Wakanda are on the hostile nation list with regard to Krakoa. And those series, Invaders and Black Panther, are the two series to which we have gotten some probable references to the Powers of X, House of X status quo outside of the X-Men books in the Marvel Universe. So I do think that this is all being very deliberately coordinated.
Yeah, and we know Coates is an X-Men fan. We've covered this before. He used Storm in that Black Panther. So Hickman, as much as people want to see this as this very insular thing, Hickman is very deliberately showing us how it's going to connect to the Fantastic Four, to Black Panther, to Namor. It's spreading. Gorgon is not just an X-Men villain either, so we're starting to see a little bit more spread in the impact here. Is Typhoid Mary invited?
Question I had was that if Atlantis was in the nations list, so it is on the nations or the rogue nations list.
No, we didn't see it on that list.
Oh, it wasn't. Yeah. That's what I'm trying to say. So it wasn't. So therefore, at some point, they agreed.
It wasn't on the Friendly Nations list. Yeah. We just haven't seen a reference to it.
Yeah. But then
the list was for Rogue Nation.
Yeah, I see what you're saying. Yeah, it wasn't on the list.
So therefore, he agreed at some point. By the time Hawks 5 happened, they have made up. That's what I'm trying to say.
Or Atlantis ceased to exist. Something happened. Something happened.
Or Namor saw that. Wait, T'Challa's not with this. I'm gonna be on this. That's what he.
Also, lots of things that could have happened, but yes, something changed in the status quo that took them off of that hostile nations list.
Right, that's what I'm saying. I mean, if it's Namor, I'm not gonna put it past him. Just because T'Challa said no, I'm gonna say yes. I know him that much. I love him. Did you guys think that? Did I get my message across?
I think you may have. So let's move on to a very, very thrilling. Now, so here's something I have to put in before we even start, because there's no data page in between. So I want to give us just a little tickler here. I did a survey on good old ye old Twitter of who is liking Hawks more and who is liking Pox more and who's just loving them both. And basically equal amounts almost of people like Hawks and the whole thing, but hardly anybody, except for me apparently, likes Powers of 10 more. And all of the people who responded specifically said, oh, I cannot stand this X to the power of 3 thing. I skip it. I don't get it. And I was reflecting that, would I feel that way too if I didn't have you guys and especially Zach to talk to about this? Because I don't know if I would have caught all the things that I've caught. Because let me tell you, any X3 scene for me now is like a point in the television. I'm ready. When it got to X3, I'm like, let's see what's going to happen. So it's become my favorite part of the series. But I do think that it's something that is really easy to get left behind, especially because it has no clear connection to the rest of the series so far. So before we even get into the scene, what are your feelings? What are you feeling when we get to an X3 scene right now, Faria?
So the thing is, who are these heathens who don't like X3?
The majority of people. Everybody but us.
Yeah, so those are heathens. First of all, heathens, stop being
You're talking to our viewership right now. You're addressing our viewers.
Exactly. Stop being heathens. Come to the island of HiX-Men where, we will indoctrinate you and then give you immortality.
Where we could do without all of these X-Men in our X-Men comics, but give me this far future hard sci-fi mythology. I will take it every time.
Yeah, that's where I am. I'm like, oh no, X-Men, great, awesome. That's what I love about X-Men.
but the thing is, what I'm saying, it's very cinematic though, because it's it just comes in at the very end, because it's always Hawks, Pox, Hawks, Pox, right? So if you're reading the Hawks, Pox, and then very end, it just kind of comes. To me, it feels like it's very quiet. The music fades away because this Namor scene would be dun, 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 dun. Little man go away. And then the music will fade away. And then we're back into this far future.
Well, it's the sequence that feels less constrained than anything else, because everything else, it's constrained either by history or even by the contours of the Marvel universe. With these X3 sequences, anything can happen. You never know issue to issue what is going to be introduced to us in these scenes.
Right, and the thing is, it's just it's giving you a mystery, it's giving you a plot that's going to be unraveled and revealed later on, and to me, it's very interesting. Now, I'm gonna be honest. All the talk is kind of very boring. I'm gonna give you that, but so I'm gonna give the heathens half a bone. But the thing is, it's getting me intrigued. Because I'm like, what's going on? How is this gonna end? And then people are saying that, it's been very long. 5 issues. Hey, listen, dum-dums, it's not even an issue once you put all the X3s together.
Well, Peter, as our scene summarizer, do you want to maybe walk us through what we do learn in this? Because it's an info-heavy scene, and we get a lot of information monologue to us. So do we want to try and go through this and see what do we learn in this scene?
Before I do, Tyler, did you have any reactions to X3 in general? That was mostly the top row talking there.
No, I mean, for me, I can understand why people feel like, this is boring, because there's a lot of talk. There's a little bit of the phalanx. There's a lot of, it's the future stuff. People couldn't, there's no connection. Like I think Zach mentioned, there's no connection to the present day, to the X-Men even. But then, Freya, I was saying that it's only 4 issues because one of the powers issue.
Oh yeah, that's true.
Yeah, didn't even have it.
So it's only four issues, and this is like the C story that is like running behind every episode of a TV series until right at the end you're like, oh, that's why this is important. That's what this is building up to, and I think that's why and. Any other writers, you'll be like, okay, this is boring. This is not going anywhere. He doesn't know what he's doing. She doesn't know what she's doing. But with Hickman, I kind of know that, this will come into play. And this is his forte. Science fiction.
Right.
So let's talk about what happened. Go ahead, Freya.
I also want to mention that I don't think any of you watch Game of Thrones, right?
No, I do.
No.
You do? Okay. So this is like the ice zombies scenes of every season of Game of Thrones, because every season of Game of Thrones from season 1 to 6 ends with this ice zombies coming. Oh my god. Even though in season 6, season 8, it fucking went nowhere. But that's different. That's because they didn't know how to do it.
Well, it might go nowhere. It is Jonathan Hickman. So let's talk about this. So where we last left this scene, basically the Elder and the Librarian, all these people had summoned the Phalanx to them. They kind of give the Phalanx a decoy, which is the Elder's consciousness in the form of a machine, and basically check to make sure that they get absorbed and are represented within the Phalanx, and they are. So we come here, and the Elder kind of is assuming victory, and so he's like, are you ready to assimilate us? And the Phalanx says, oh yeah, this is our terms, and he basically says we accept, and just shatters the Elder because he's made of organic matter and he's gone, and the Phalanx doesn't actually assimilate organic matter, it just consumes organic matter. So this is happening like out on the surface of the planet, and then inside we get the Librarian and Nimrod the Greater having a little chat, and the Librarian's like, I don't get it, like what they said they were going to assimilate us, why are they not just taking the intelligence we've offered them? And Nimrod is like, you're not thinking like a machine, let me give you the real story. When you think about these intergalactic machine empires, you have to think about the weight of their knowledge, and the literal weight, because it turns them into a singularity, almost like a black hole, and kind of sucks in everything around it. And in order to do that, it's going to have to consume everything there is about us organically and biologically as a planet. So that's the 90-second summary of what goes on across these scant 4 pages of the X3 future. And I know Zach is going to have a lot to say about this, but let's start with Faria.
No, I'm just gonna pass it off to Zach because I don't have much to say. There's a lot of information dumped. They kind of and it's progresses all the societies that you can have, or like SIs, right? Like
Yeah, well, we'll get to data. Yeah, we might have to talk about the data pages like in with this because
right. But the thing is, like, I'm gonna pass it off to Zach.
Well, we can get to the data pages because I think there's a lot of discussion to be had about that. But in terms of the basic things that we learn in this monologue from Nimrod, this notion of these societies of singularity black holes, which are not made out of the same sort of matter that other things are made out of. They're made out of what Hickman ends up making up of the fundamental building blocks of the universe. The small he comes up with the new Kerbon particle, which has now been introduced to the fundamental makeup of the Marvel universe. And Nimrod describes the Phalanx as serving their masters. In other words, collecting energy for these larger and larger civilizations on the Kardashev scale that require the ability to harness and utilize greater and greater forms of energy, which in a lot of ways are what we've been seeing happen on a much smaller scale with both mutant kind and humankind in the more present sequences, forming bigger societies that are going to form dynamos to harness more and more and more energy. And what we're starting to see here in this sequence is the flip side of that societal achievement. That the cost and the risk that comes along with that is that in order to form these bigger societies, you have to keep using more and more and more energy. And where is that energy going to come from? You have to wipe out everything in your path.
Yeah.
I mean, this is not exactly how I was reading it the first time or even the second time, because it says, I think when Nimrod the Greater, okay, but before I go on to what I was thinking, it makes a lot of sense what you just said. It's just that it didn't occur to me when I first read it, and then when I read it again, it still didn't occur to me. But so when I was reading it, when Nimrod was trying to explain why they are consuming the elder, he's just saying that, look, you modded us, the thinking machine after you, and that is how you would react. But the Phalanx are being modded by someone else, their masters, and they do not necessarily work the same way as you. They do not necessarily think the same way as you, which is why they are not going to do what you expect them to do.
No. Well, he actually specifically says that this is what they expected, because they wanted their consciousness to become part of this larger entity, which it did. But what they didn't anticipate was that the Phalanx are not themselves the grand entity to hand themselves over. The Phalanx, here's a comparison to make. We actually spoke in an earlier episode. It was Faria who made the comparison of the structure of Krakoa looked like different molecules of a complex organism. And that's exactly what's going on here. It turns out that the entire universe, what we think of as our full societies, and even huge societies like the Phalanx, these are actually essentially molecules in these universal scope societies, these titans and these strongholds and these dominions that, as far as Nimrod seems to know, are the highest levels of society in the universe. There's an implication on the chart page that we see that they are not as high up as it goes. And I do want to talk about that a little bit when we get there. I'll give everybody else a chance to talk first. But I think basically that's what Nimrod is getting at here. It's like, no, these aren't your protectors. These are the molecule predator. These are the predator molecules for a much larger organism that they're serving.
Got it.
Yeah, one of the things that's interesting to me about this is, I still am on the train that is probably Life 6 or Life 9, but regardless, it clearly connects to our story somehow. And it's a cautionary tale, but it's also something Hickman promised about this. We're going to take the X-Men past things we always associated with them and to something further, right? So we've always had the X-Men in space. We've always had the X-Men, and the Technarchs and the Phalanx and things. But how can we kind of connect them to something much bigger than that? In the same way that Hickman drew together all of the Kree-based races and all of the queens of those races with Black Bolt in his Fantastic Four run. And I really think that this scene is kind of like trying to expand our scope to like stop thinking about mutants just on Earth. If we're starting to think about mutants as a collective and the real meaning of Cerebro, regardless of if it's in Life 6 or Life 9 or Life 10 or whatever, that we eventually, the mutants are not just going to hit up upon the mutant human problem on Earth, or even the human mutant machine problem on Earth. They're going to hit upon what they as a society in the galactic idiom has to deal with or confront. And to me, that's just really, it's really interesting. And that's why it's so engaging to me, because it's Hickman saying, like, keep your eye a little bit higher than this Krakoa Xavier stuff that we're doing, because there's way bigger implications to a unified front of mutants than just the mutant human metaphor. And that to me is exciting, because I'm kind of over the mutant human metaphor. And like Maria's been saying all along, like, oh, do we have to see the mutants being oppressed again? And this is Hickman saying, like, we're playing a different ballgame.
Right. And this is where like Hickman excels all the time. Like, and that's one of the reasons I love him, like love his work so much, because he's above petty human emotion. Like happiness, sadness, like those kind of, I don't care for that. Like, you know, I can go to all these other writers to kind of look into that. But superheroes doing such great things, like, you know, so like beyond normal human emotion kind of things that, you know, and so high concept things, that's where he excels in. And I'm kind of excited to see where this is going to go. I have no idea how this is going to connect. I'm not even going to pretend to even speculate, but I am really excited to see where this is going to go.
Well, I think there are a couple of different connections that I do want to highlight now that I think we can already see, even though I think the ultimate direction of this is still far from clear. One of them is that we do need to look back and remember the fate of the 4th generation chimeras back in Life 9, which, if you remember from way back on that data page, we were told that they were a hive mind that collapsed into a self-singularity, destroying the breeding pits of Mars and causing the fall of Krakoa. In other words, as we learned from this chart and this explanation, they became a Titan society.
Right. They like hopscotched past, because Hive is pretty low on the list, right?
Right.
But they became a Titan.
So that is alarming, because you can also remember Cerebro contains 16 million mutant minds, which puts it on the level of becoming a Titan singularity. And there are 5 of them, which together puts it on the level of the stronghold level of universal society. So is Xavier going deliberately, accidentally, somehow going to end up creating one of these stronghold societies with the consciousness of all mutant kind? There seems to be an implication of that sort of hovering out in the story now.
Well, and also that Krakoa has a built-in black hole in a way with the No Place, especially given the history that we just got of Krakoa and its kind of departed sibling, which allows Xavier to like artificially accelerate this process. He's one of the Cerebros is in Mora's No Place. That sounds really wrong phrasing, but like he's almost got all the ingredients already. It's actually really alarming.
Yeah.
The other alarming thing is that there seems to be this weird implication that, like, why and how do the robots know about this? And why do they seem to like it so much? That we have in the tone and the sort of menacing visual aspect of Nimrod talking about it here, a sense that he's pretty glad that every living thing is going to be wiped out in the service of these universal level masters. We had the very knowing speech from Omega back in Life 9 asking, do you know what's at the center of a real black hole? It's where we're all going in the end.
Yeah.
And then we had Mother Mold nattering on about Titans and using the fire of Olympus to destroy you, as she hurtled into the sun. So this seems to be in line with something that the machines want to happen, whether or not they actually know about what the highest level of these societies really will turn out to be.
Yeah, it's almost like they're being called towards it. Like the machines, like as they get more sentience, are like have this image of something that could be there for them, and they're not all the way there yet. And in that way, they've become these like portentous seers that are proclaiming these things to the mutants. And like many of our mutants in the present day don't really get the importance of what the robots are telling them. But like all of the robots have like a little piece of this, almost in the way that a hologram, any piece of a hologram has the full picture of a hologram, because that's how holograms work. Like it's almost the same thing with mutants, what they're learning from the robots, and the robots as a hive mind.
And it's kind of also like, it's like leave behind, like in something that Magneto in the last Hawks 5, that it's like when mutants are no longer being persecuted, what they can do is like they're going to become a better society or a higher level of society than puny humans ever could. Great, good. Now let's erase the humans from this world. maybe we can leave Kamala Khan alone, and then everyone else. Can we
But
please
that's-
retcon Kamala as a mutant now? Maybe we
No,
should.
but that's, I mean,
know?
there's also this deliberate symbol of a tree that is drawn there.
Yeah.
In the underground, there's this tree, but it's made up of cables, and then it's surrounded by 12 panels, which is like, I think it's just a deliberate attempt to just, give us some sort of like, connection. But yeah.
So do we want to spend any more time on the data page?
Oh, we absolutely do. We absolutely do.
Exactly. I think there's some begun.
Oh yes,
right.
I have not yet begun to lecture on this data page. No, I think there's a lot of interesting stuff here. So we talk first on this before we even get to the visual chart. On the text data page, where we talk about these 3 new levels of society, these titans, these strongholds, which are smaller networks of titans, but exist in a perpetual scheme of war. We're looking at the page right before that now, the text page. And then dominions, which we are told this fascinating thing that in terms of intellect and power, a dominion is not colloquially godlike, but categorically godlike and indistinguishable from any and all mythic or religious comparisons. So when we look at this theme of aspirations to godhood, we are being explicitly told right on this page, these are your gods. These are your new gods. What you worship up in the sky, it's these. It's these dominion level societies.
Well, and let's not lose sight of, doesn't a dominion as a term have a biblical connection?
These terms all have biblical connections. And actually,
okay.
Robert, well, I wasn't going to get into it. This will, those who are not reading HoxPox Talks on Polygon via Xavier files every week, absolutely should be. Because Robert Secundus, who is the expert in angelology and X-Men, will be pointing out in this week's article that these terms are all terms that are traditionally used to describe choirs of angels.
A dominion to me is a grouping of angels. It's like a dazzle of zebras. It's a dominion of angels.
These are deliberately angelic terms. And so these levels of societies are being equated with levels of godhood. These are the gods. Now, what's really interesting here is that you can see on the visual chart that we're being shown here 6 levels of society. But if you combine that with the smaller earthbound levels of society that we saw back in POX 2, we're actually up to 9 now. And it was Jonathan Olson on Twitter who pointed out that POX 2, the little coding at the bottom of the page, foreshadowed that we were going to go from galactic level societies to universal level societies like we have here. And so we probably have some foreshadowing in the coding here that we have not yet seen the last level. That beyond these 9 levels, I would speculate that there is a 10th level, which is what we're being shown here as the Abyss, which is a very, very interesting term for Hickman to use, because that is a mythological term and it's a specifically biblical term. And in the Bible, it's used 2 ways, and I think both of them are actually really relevant to this series. So one of them is basically as a synonym for the underworld, the land of Sheol, the hazy realm of the dead, which means that it may connect this abyss level, should it be out there, with what we've seen with the netherworld of Limbo or wherever else it is that lies beneath Krakoa. Something that connects these overworld of these celestial god-level universal societies with the underworld of the limbo gods. That's one connection. But that same term for abyss, it's used in Genesis 1 to refer to the primordial chaos that precedes creation. This is what God in Genesis creates the universe out of, this original chaos. So I would speculate that if level 10 is this abyss which represents death and nothingness, and ultimately the energy destruction of the universe, then there is beyond that a level 11 equivalent to Moira's life 11, which is the recreation of the universe, a new beginning, a new genesis that can somehow come out of this abyss and this destruction. I think thematically that may very well be what Hickman is leading up to. That's my big theory for this.
And also it's powers of 10. the 10 societies.
Yeah, the 10 is significant per Hickman. And that, everybody, has been Zach's Biblical Corner.
Oh, but I've got one little stinger to go along with that. Because that Hebrew word for abyss, that word is tehom. It literally means the deep. And it actually comes from and is cognate with the Mesopotamian god Tiamat. What was Tiamat? Tiamat was the god of the deepest sea, the ocean. This nautical theme, this oceanic deep sea theme that we've seen weaving all through this issue, that is the abyss. That is Tiamat. That is Tehom. That is the nothingness and creation. That is the highest level of the universe.
Wow. Ooh. And then also, that's why probably the issue ends with one of the quotes from Namor.
Yes, indeed.
Because, so I want to, before, it ends with Namor saying, "When you see me again, understand what that means."
And I hope after this discussion, we now all understand what that means.
So look, before
if he told me that, I'll be like, is that...
So before we dissect the full spoilers of the quiet government of Krakoa, why don't we do our final reactions? Just because that way people who really, really don't want to be spoiled can turn off the show and not be hit by any spoilers. So let's go around the clock here. Freya, what were your overall reactions on Pox 5?
So, I've been loving HuxPox so far. I think Pox 4 was... I was a little about it because it was a lot of information done, but how it's all coming together, I'm just loving it so far. I'm loving every minute that the mutants are going somewhere. It's no longer moping, but it's like they're evolving beyond petty human emotions and then doing cultish thing, creating rogue nations, doing all kinds of pretty much fucking shit up. And I am just absolutely loving all of this. And this is kind of give you a behind the scene look of what we have seen in Hawks 5. So yeah, to me, I'm just in it. I'm still loving it. So I cannot wait to see Hawks 6 next week.
Zach?
Well, I enjoyed the heck out of this issue. And if I were to participate in that poll, I've got to admit, I am definitely on Team Pox. I know intellectually that these are intertwining parts of one larger story, but I would be lying if I didn't acknowledge that issue to issue, I am just enjoying these Pox issues so much more. I love the grand mythologies that Hickman is setting up, both with his hard sci-fi and then sometimes with his sort of mythological background for Krakoa in these other issues. I love the mutant politics. I could watch Krakoan West Wing all day long. I love these dives into X-Men continuity and watching everybody form these alliances. The things that these issues go into are just so much more interesting to me than the sort of obligatory deadly fights with robots in space that Hickman sort of feels forced to engage in. So I really like this issue.
Tyler?
For me, in all Hickman's comics, in his his run, there is always a point where sometimes it becomes a little bit too dense for me and becomes too much for me. And this happens to be one of those issues. I still like it. I like that all the characters actually doesn't have a weird voice. It's sort of this is true to that character. Oh yes, Emma is there, Namor is there. We know Professor X has been creepy right from the beginning. So there's nothing wrong here with the character voice. But it does have a little bit. It is a bit dense at some point. Especially when we are which issue is this? This is the 10th issue of the entire event. So it happens. But doesn't mean I don't like it. I still like it. It's just that it probably reads a lot better if, let's say, I start reading again from Hawks 1 all the way through, and then knowing where it ends, maybe at the end of his third year or his final issue of this whole mutant saga. That'll be great. Peter?
This issue made me think of the idea of a cautionary tale. Be careful what you wish for. a lot of times X-Men fans are asking for this thing. Why didn't we see Cable hug Hope when he came back from the dead? Show me that. And then when we actually get those things, fans like never feel like they're quite as excited about the thing as they claimed they would be, which is why a lot of the writers and editors say, you don't really know what you're asking for. We're going to give you what you need and not what you want. And in a way, this issue kind of felt to me like, something that we wanted, right? Like we get this like Xavier and Forge very winking scene. Did we really need that scene? I don't know. We got Emma Hickman, in my opinion, other than maybe one or two word balloons, just nailing Emma, totally getting her voice and getting what motivates her. But did we need the scene, or did we just want the scene? And I feel like that even with Namor, it's the scene we clearly all wanted, right?
I wanted it.
Yeah, we all wanted it bad. So, my reaction to this is like, I loved it. But I, if you go back through the videos, have been responding pretty positively to all of the Powers of 10 issues, with the exception of Powers of 10-3, which I thought just like needed a couple of more pages. It wasn't even that I didn't like it. And so I think that the reaction that a lot of people are having to this issue, that it's like a little bit dense, it's a little bit softer, it's because Hickman gave us a lot of the things that we said we wanted, which is part of his machinations here of being like, now let me show you what you really needed, which is, I think, kind of like what he's doing with seeding these themes from X3 back into the rest of the run, as Zach so expertly highlighted. And then the final thing I would probably say about it is like, how to put this? It's satisfying to me because it's addressing these bigger themes, but I'm somebody who's always like, I don't care about these bigger themes in X-Men, just show me the soap opera. And so to me, it's really interesting because Hickman's getting me engaged with this bigger stuff that I usually push away from, the time stuff, the philosophical stuff, where I'm just like, hey, give me some X-Men, playing basketball or whatever. Whereas he's giving me theoretically the more personal or X-Men focused stuff in House of X, and it's just not working for me at all. So I think it's going to be interesting to see what happens with his like actual X-Men series. Is it going to be Hoxier? Is it going to be Poxier? Is it going to feel like both? Or is it going to feel like something else entirely? Because these are two very different books, even though they're very intertwined.
Let alone how he's going to write the New Mutants. Teenagers in Space. See how he does that.
Well, his Future Foundation was fantastic. So, could be great.
No, I also wanted to say that just for you, I also made sure that if ever Emma says done no, because I know you don't care for that. And this issue did not have Emma saying done no.
No, the one thing she said was when she said, I just got rid of him, that felt like kind of colloquial to me for Emma. Like I feel like she would have said like, I disposed of him or something. That was the only time that I
thought that specific line worked because she is just so shocked and exasperated that she just got finished dealing with this guy and now she's got to bring him back.
Yeah, I think it works because Silva's art there is actually so funny that it sells the joke. Yeah, I agree.
To me, like the way I was like, I just got like, that's how I read it. Like, but the thing is, I was gonna say though, like, I think without Pox, Hawks would not be as interesting to me.
Yeah.
Like, it would be just another seen it, done it. What's new, But I think that Pox is actually truly making it Hickman.
I said before that Hawks really feels like the Avengers to his new Avengers. It's the story that has to be there to facilitate the story that he really wants to be telling.
Yeah,
and I think that Hawks is the story he wants to tell.
I'm way more into the story that he wants to tell than the story that's there to make people buy the comic books.
Right. All right. Yeah. So shall we move into the council? So let's.
All right. So spoilers.
Big spoilers. Stop listening now. You can come back to us when you're done. But spoilers.
Okay. So The Beat was the website that broke this, and we could talk a whole different conversation about the ethics of bringing to the public something that Marvel did as a mistake in their previous stuff, but we'll save that conversation for later. We learned that there are the 4 houses of this shadow government, and we see the houses in the actual issue, but they have the actual names of the people. So let's start with the one that we have 2 of already. We know the Black King and the White Queen are 2 of the Spring House. Emma asks for a 3rd seat, and as many people, myself included, predicted, the 3rd seat is for Kitty Pryde, except for here she's credited as Kate Pryde, the Red Queen, which actually has already been shown to us on the Dodderman cover of Marauders #2. So the answer was there all along.
Mm-hmm.
Thoughts on this particular part of the government?
I was not expecting Kitty Pryde. like at all.
No.
You know, no,
Really?
not
It's so obvious.
why? Like,
Well,
you know,
I think it's what everybody was hoping to see. I think it's the dynamic that we all wanted, because the two of them play off each other so well as sort of antagonistic foils who also absolutely need each other and see that they are very similar and don't want to acknowledge it. And that's always been a great dynamic between the two of them.
I thought that, you know, she was thinking of Jean Grey, like, you know, to keep her in her place, like, you know, just like an antagonistic, like just to give herself a challenge.
Well, historically, that's exactly what she uses Kitty Pryde to do. I mean, in Joss Whedon's run, that's exactly why she brings Kitty back to the X-Men, back to the mansion, specifically because she wants somebody there to be a check on her.
Yeah, I think that's what it is for me, that even though Jean is in a way an equal to Emma, Emma sees Kitty as the natural check on her worst tendencies. And it kind of relates to that whole For the Children thing. Like, Kitty is somebody that Emma tries to usurp as her student multiple times and fails repeatedly. And Kitty kind of turns out well, and all of Emma's students die. So Emma has this like intrinsic relationship with Kitty where it's almost like the one that got away, but it's a good thing that she got away. And so as soon as she had to have Shaw back, which like Shaw naturally kind of spoils Emma's good urges, I knew immediately that if she asked for a third seat, it would either be for Jean, Storm, or Kitty, and it turns out that it's Kitty, and I think it makes perfect sense.
Well, it's funny because it's both altruistic and it's Machiavellian. Because on the one hand, she wants somebody to keep her in check and be a good influence on her. On the other hand, she almost certainly sees that it's going to be very easy to play Kate and Sebastian against each other, and therefore to gain power in the void between the two of them.
Oh,
so she's also maneuvering to keep herself on top on this quarter of the government.
So Marvel has done a lot of things where it's like they have, with the MCU and their TV shows and everything, they have always started to make the characters look like the movie counterparts. I still cannot believe Sebastian Shaw still doesn't look like Kevin Bacon. Like, come on, that's a wasted opportunity.
It's all in the past, now it's being rebooted.
Yeah, and plus Kevin Bacon was I mean, I love Kevin Bacon. I've met him, so your Bacon number is 2 because mine is 1. But he was poor casting for Shaw.
No, I don't agree. Anyway.
So now let's go to another one here. We have 2 actually revealed on the page, Professor X, Magneto, and as many people surmised, the third person in the Autumn trio is Apocalypse.
Ooh, I like this.
So it's kind of like positions the three of them as these 3 factional leaders of the mutant race. You know, it's pretty interesting. And Professor X and Magneto have never really had a relationship with Apocalypse at any prior point that I can recall. Zach?
No, they haven't. And what stands out to me most is not just the presence of Apocalypse, but the absence of Mora, who throughout the rest of this history has been the third part of that triumvirate. And knowing what we know about the connection between Mora and Apocalypse now from Life 9, I think that's a very fascinating substitution.
Yeah.
I kind of didn't know about this like spoiler just before we started, and then as soon as Tyler said that it's Apocalypse, this whole thing became like Dominion level better. Like the whole like how they're creating the government, because this is like better than seeing Namor. Like, it was that good. Like how Machiavellian they are. They gave 1 seat to the head of the villains, like to the best villains that they have, because that's the way you keep peace. Like, you know,
absolutely, this is necessary.
Yeah, who else could it possibly be? You couldn't say Namor because he's got his own thing going. Apocalypse is other than maybe Sinister, who in a way is subordinate to Apocalypse. Apocalypse is the only character that makes sense to form a trio with Xavier and Magneto.
Makes the Hawks thing welcome home. That whole thing,
yeah.
so much better. Like, guys, I'm shaking with excitement. Like, as soon as I learned that, this whole thing, I mean, this is perfect. This is perfection.
I mean,
Do you think that Xavier told Apocalypse that before he invited him? Like, I'm inviting you and you're going to have a seat in the government? Like, when does the actual... Because we see with Emma that they basically, to bring her in, they tell her this. So did Xavier, when he did his psychic projection to Apocalypse, did he say, oh, by the way, you're going to be one of the rulers?
And that's why the whole Dove thing happened, because they're welcoming their government, their governing, one of the governing councilmen, like, to the... It just made it so much better. This is perfection. This is
Zach,
perfection.
what were you about to say?
But where is Moira? And it's interesting. Well, the lineup of this council turns out to have been sort of revealed to us in one of the promo images released before HoXPoX came out.
It's the cover of our midterm report.
It is. In fact, it is. And all of those promo images so far have, in fact, come true in some form, except for the Moira and Apocalypse as embracing lovers image. And with Apocalypse as the substitution for Moira on this triumvirate, I remain totally fascinated by what we might see in the course of this series to come.
Yeah.
So that's the
Tyler?
reason why Apocalypse is there, and I think the pretty obvious connection is, of course, all three of them knew. My guess is that Apocalypse knew of Moira's plan as well.
So I'll make one more comment there, that they've done a lot of great work with Apocalypse in the last year. And as much as I have negative things to say about some of the things that have come out of the X office with the knowledge of Hickman looming, the work that they've done in X-Men Black with Apocalypse and then in Age of X-Men with Apocalypse, I think was necessary for us to buy Apocalypse in this way. So Free, can you show that screen again? So it looks like 3 black bars here in spring, but if you squint at the bottom bar, you can actually make out, and this is in the actual issue that everybody has available to them on Comixology, Mystique's name. So Mystique is anchoring this and makes you think perhaps this is that thing Mystique was asking for in order to do her mission. And the people who will be joining Mystique that we learned via spoilers, and this is bad news, is Mr. Sinister and Exodus.
So this is quite the panel of government right here.
Oh my goodness. What are they going to get done other than just being catty assholes? Like, it's the
orgies. You need to have orgies in order to keep a country happy.
The entire winter panel seems to be set up as like a deliberate check on the autumn panel. Specifically with Sinister as a check on Apocalypse and Exodus as a check on Magneto, because both of them have very iffy histories with those particular characters.
And Mystique with Xavier, who may or may not have a child together, per Brian Bendis.
That's right. That's right. So I think for whatever reason, those 3 are there, possibly by design, possibly just as negotiation, so that they can effectively halt whatever it is that the Xavier Magneto Apocalypse faction wants to do.
And then, gosh, just the thought of the 3 of them in a room talking makes me laugh. So then the final one, which we get no hints for here, but is revealed via spoiler, is the summer panel, which has Storm, not surprising, given how we saw her in House of X last week, Marvel Girl, which is a name you might refer to Jean Grey with, and Nightcrawler.
They're the religious faction. They're the religious. No, they're so. That's the thing. Like, I keep on thinking that what is the function of each of these factions? Like, because they are deliberately set up differently, like that way. So one of them is clearly the Black Ops. One of them is the main one. That's the one, Professor X and all of them. And then pretty much the Winter is like to check them. And in order to keep peace and keep everyone, all the happy juices flowing, it's them, because they're the Storm, Nightcrawler, who also have a lot of religious connection, and Marvel Girl and Jean Grey, just because we need to have Jean Grey. I'm sorry.
It feels like it's almost like the philosophical core of the giant size X-Men team. Like Cyclops and Wolverine and even Colossus at that point were much more obvious physical characters, and the Jean Grey and Storm and Nightcrawler were always the characters that had a little bit of a deeper thing happening. And I just think it's interesting that they're all from that vintage and they all know each other from there. I love when there's Jean and Nightcrawler connections. People forget that they were friends and they were close. Tom Taylor used it to great effect in X-Men Red. So, and Storm was on that team too. So this summer team kind of feels like the wink of some of the setup that X-Men Red was doing. And it gives me a little bit more faith that we're going to be seeing a Jean who's significant here, because it seems to be nodding at some of those recent developments.
But I think that's right, and I do like the dynamic here, just in terms of characters. But I think that Freya really hit the nail on the head with this being the faction that sort of serves a spiritual, emotional function, as opposed to the very hard-edged, commercial, trading, diplomatic CIA function of the Spring Panel.
Yeah, and it's summer. It's like summer comes, everything's in bloom, right? It's about the happiness and the emotional welfare of the community, and I think that this is like the empathetic trio of these four trios.
And then at the bottom, below these panels, we have Krakoa as a panel unto itself, consisting of Krakoa and Cypher as maybe a vote, maybe just the interpreter for Krakoa's vote. Yeah. But in either case, solidifying Krakoa as an active and apparently willing player in this scheme, because Krakoa is actually a part of the governing body.
And as we look at this diagram of how they all relate to each other, we cannot help but see some of the parallels to some of the diagrams we've seen of the levels of society, including Titans and Dominions that we were just talking about.
Mm-hmm.
Because you see that those lines ghosted behind that would make it look a lot more like one of those graphs.
That's right. Well, and also this makeup of these individuals turning into larger bodies, which are in turn part of a larger organism, which in turn is the head of an even larger organism.
Yeah. Well, there you go, folks. That's the full spoilage.
Spoilage. I also kind of love that Krakoa got a seat in the table, like, and especially like, they didn't not only put Krakoa, they also said like, oh, Cypher, you got to be in there too.
Well, they need to know what Krakoa's saying.
Yeah,
Cypher's the only one who knows.
Yeah.
But yeah, he could be the age, right? Like, yeah. But no, you get a seat too. You get a seat. You get a seat. You all get a seat. But
You're like Oprah.
Yeah, like Oprah. But the thing is, like, here's the thing. Krakoa says that, dude, you cannot be here. What he's gonna do is just shake them off him, like put them in the sea, like shake them off.
He just stopped blooming. No more flowers.
He did once eat an entire team of X-Men, so I'm just going to put that out there.
Yeah, so
he has ways.
He's gonna eat them all. But anyway, I'm just so excited to see how this is going to come together.
But the thing about the winter panel, right? Did anyone think that they are there because Xavier and Magneto want to keep them in check?
Oh, like not only to have them kept in check, but to keep them in check too.
Yeah,
absolutely. They're there to be balances on each other.
Yeah.
No, I mean, the thing is like, no, not you're saying that so that they don't go out and do some weird things. Now they're
sort of. Yeah,
no, I think we're totally agreeing here. It's cutting both ways. Both of these factions, in order to be an alliance, need to keep checks on each other.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
So it's like, I want to keep check on you, and then so that the other side is like, okay, then I can also keep check on you. Yeah.
Right.
So,
but the thing is, like, to be honest, though, it's not a very like. I know we're celebrating this. They don't have the good of like the regular normal mutant at heart. Like they're
more self-interested.
Yeah, they're very overall. They're not. They would not care what Glob would think.
Does anyone?
Like, no, and for good reason. But anyway.
Well, yeah, I know what you mean.
Thank you so much for joining us. This was very extensive, discussion, as we do. This is what our brand is now. We will be back next week to talk about HiX 5.
HiX 6.
That's true.
Yeah. We are in the home stretch, people.
Home stretch, like HiX. Like HiX 6. So, I cannot wait to see where this is all going to go. And, so do join us. And also, Tyler, Zach, and I will be in New York Comic Con next week as well. So if you see us, do come say hi. And Peter will be there in spirit because we'll have Peter in with us. So anyway, thank you so much for joining us. And we will see you soon. All right, Peter, bring us home. Good night.